Hey guys, tonight we find ourselves wandering the marbled corridors of a Byzantine palace. Outside, Constantinople's streets are quiet, save for the low, perpetual hum of the sea lapping against the ancient walls. Candles flicker against gold-tiled ceilings, shadows darting along the mosaics of saints and emperors past. But you aren't looking at the ceilings. No, your eyes are drawn lower, to the faces around you. Thick mustaches, fine mustaches, wispy mustaches, these aren't mere decorations. They are badges of pride, power, and peril. Here, in the glittering heart of the empire, a man's mustache isn't just personal grooming, it's a political declaration. You glance nervously at the wax curls of a senator's mustache, the straight, disciplined line above a general's lip, and the broad, bristling display sported by the patriarch himself. Even in the cool halls of imperial administration, mustaches dominate. And you? You fumble at your upper lip, acutely aware that any slip in your grooming could be your downfall. Byzantium, after all, isn't known for leniency. Tonight's story, one you probably won't survive if you're careless, unspools from a single, foolish decision about facial hair. A young emperor, a too bold decree, and a moustache-related meltdown that led to war, betrayal, and a legacy that modern historians still chuckle over, even as they argue whether it was truly about hair or deeper, tangled politics. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere interesting, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward, past gilded doors and guards draped in silks, to the throne room. The emperor's seat, lavishly encrusted with gems that glint like distant stars, sits at the far end. But what draws your eye is not the gold or the splendor. It's the emperor himself, young, restless, and, to your growing horror, disturbingly clean-shaven. This, you realize, is Constantine VI, a boy thrust too early onto the imperial stage. Born to the purple, they said, but more born to confusion and compromise, a ruler tangled in the web of his mother's ambitions and the endless schemes of the court. His mustache, or lack thereof, is a scandal barely whispered but widely acknowledged. You'd heard the murmurs on your way here, too smooth, they hissed, too boyish. A soldier without a mustache was no soldier at all, they said. A general without one? Practically treasonous. And an emperor who didn't wear his authority upon his upper lip? Well, the empire might as well be wearing a nightgown and slippers to war. The Byzantines had always been a people who prized the visible markers of power. Robes, rings, ceremonial swords. But mustaches? They were an armor unto themselves. Facial hair had a kind of sacred symbolism. Thick whiskers spoke of wisdom, virility, gravitas. To shave it was to expose one's weakness, one's youth, one's inexperience. You might as well walk around wearing a sign that said, "Please usurp me." Historians still argue whether this mustache obsession was a true cultural fixture or just one of those oddities that survives in over-enthusiastic chronicles. Regardless, you don't have to be a scholar to notice the glances Constantine gets. He sits uneasily on the throne, shifting in the seat like he's borrowed it from a much larger, much hairier man. His chin juts out defiantly, as if daring the court to question his naked upper lip. And the court, being what it is, does not disappoint. Whispered jokes ripple through the room like a breeze. You catch snippets, something about a hairless cat, a baby-faced god. The emperor rises, brushing non-existent crumbs from his silk robes. He approaches the dais at the center of the room, where a proclamation sits waiting, sealed and ominous. The courtiers lean in. Constantine clears his throat. You brace yourself. This is the moment. The decree that will ripple outward, absurd and unstoppable. We hereby proclaim, he begins, voice cracking slightly before steadying, that all officers and men in service of the imperial army shall be clean-shaven. A gasp, small but unmistakable, ripples through the crowd. Someone drops a ceremonial staff with a clatter that echoes painfully loud in the silence. You resist the urge to run. It's not just tradition he's challenging, it's identity, power, masculinity itself. You feel the weight of 1,000 mustached stares converge on him, and by extension, you. Historians still debate whether Constantine acted out of genuine reformist zeal, aesthetic preference, or the careless arrogance of youth. Some suggest it was a power move, an attempt to redefine loyalty and appearance in his image. Others whisper that he simply didn't like the scratchiness. Regardless, it's a decree that will plunge Byzantium into chaos, absurdity, and ultimately, war. And you, standing in this flickering chamber of wax and gold, are now a witness to the first, bewildering chapter of a Moustache-fueled disaster. You stand rooted to the marble floor as murmurs erupt like a storm cloud in the great hall. The Moustache decree, already nicknamed the Great Shave by a few brazen courtiers, spreads through the corridors and alleys of Constantinople faster than gossip at a royal banquet. Outside, word reaches the army barracks, where battle-hardened men, many of whom have carefully groomed their mustaches into wax masterpieces, gather to digest the news. The reactions are varied but uniformly negative. Some scoff, tugging at their mustaches defiantly, while others look genuinely distressed, as if asked to part with a beloved pet. You imagine the sight of a grizzled veteran, fingers trembling as he contemplates shearing the symbol of his valor and station. In Byzantium, you realize, a man's mustache wasn't just for style, it was an identity. It told the world who you were, soldier, scholar, noble, or peasant. The fancier the mustache, the more important the man. To lose it was to lose status, pride, even one's sense of self. Historians still argue about the exact cultural weight mustaches carried in the Byzantine army. Some suggest they were formalized in military codes, while others think the whole thing was exaggerated by later chroniclers desperate for a juicy story. Either way, the soldiers are furious. Meanwhile, among the city's barbershops, chaos reigns. Barbers, the once respected custodians of facial glory, find themselves in an awkward position. Customers now come in not for a careful trim, but with trembling hands, demanding a full shave, and some barbers refuse on principle. In dim, smoky back rooms, mustache-wearing conspirators gather, whispering treason over sharpening strops and bowls of lather. One legend says that a particularly rebellious barber, whose name history has, perhaps mercifully, forgotten, posted a sign reading, "No traitor is shaving done here." You like to imagine him standing there, arms crossed, mustache twitching in righteous indignation. But not everyone views the decree with such grave seriousness. Across the city, a quieter, snarkier rebellion brews. Satirical pamphlets circulate, tiny, hand-inked drawings of mustache-less emperors with baby faces, clutching rattles instead of scepters. Mimes in the marketplace perform exaggerated skits where they swoon dramatically after losing a single hair. And then, of course, come the mustache pranks. Soldiers begin to draw fake mustaches on their faces with charcoal, some even donning absurd false whiskers made from goat hair or horsetails. One particularly bold group, nicknamed the Bristlers, dons elaborate fake mustaches at military drills. It's a satirical protest, one that the emperor's spies report with a mixture of horror and barely concealed laughter. You catch a glimpse of one prank yourself. A young officer, too clever by half, ties a fake mustache onto his helmet, letting it flap wildly in the breeze during parade inspections. The effect is both hilarious and deeply disrespectful. The crowd roars with laughter, and the emperor, hearing of it later, is said to have turned a dangerous shade of purple. Historians still debate whether Constantine understood how much he was being mocked or if he dismissed it all as petty disobedience. Some say he cracked down brutally, others believe he remained aloof, convinced of his own genius. Either way, the mustache decree is no longer just about grooming, it has become a symbol, a rallying cry. At the heart of this brewing rebellion stands one man, the mustache's greatest champion, General Nicephorus. You haven't met him yet, but you've heard the rumors. A veteran of countless campaigns, Nicephorus is renowned for two things, his cunning strategies and his magnificent mustache, rumored to be so thick that birds once tried to nest in it. You smile at the thought but quickly sober. Nicephorus, they say, is no fan of Constantine's decree. In fact, he sees it as the perfect excuse to make a move he's long contemplated, seizing the throne for himself. As you wander the now quiet palace corridors, the weight of what's coming settles heavily on your shoulders. This won't be just a squabble over shaving cream and razors. No, it's going to spiral into something much larger and messier. And you, unwitting traveler, are about to watch an empire lurch into war over a matter as small and as absurd as a few inches of facial hair. Outside the city walls, in dark corners of taverns and behind the closed doors of military barracks, the whispers grow louder. Mustache pride stiffens into mustache defiance. In the capital, citizens begin sporting tiny mustache pins on their tunics, a subtle act of rebellion. Children in the street play at being generals, drawing elaborate facial hair on each other with soot. There's even an early song, a lilting, mocking tune sung in the wine shops, that rhymes shave with grave and paints the emperor as a boy-king more suited to a nursery than a battlefield. You can hear it now as you pass a tavern door, the tune light and merry, the words sharp as a barber's razor. It's the beginning of a rebellion. And like many rebellions in history, it starts not with a bang, but with a snicker, and perhaps a few ill-advised mustache jokes. You find yourself drawn toward the barracks, where the real drama is about to unfold. The heavy scent of sweat, steel, and, oddly, beeswax mustache pomade hangs in the air. It's a kind of sacred space for the soldiers, and tonight it thrums with tension. At the center of the room stands General Nicephorus. Even in the dim candlelight, his mustache is a force of nature, bushy, carefully oiled, and twirled into fierce points that look sharp enough to skewer an olive. You realize with a jolt that it's not just facial hair, it's a statement, a battle flag, a line in the sand. Nicephorus isn't shouting. He doesn't need to. His mere presence commands attention. You watch as he strokes his mustache thoughtfully, a slow, deliberate gesture that seems to calm the soldiers more effectively than a dozen speeches. "Men," he says, voice low and gravelly, "they would strip us of our honor one hair at a time." A murmur of agreement ripples through the ranks. Some of the younger soldiers nod vigorously, mustaches bristling in indignation. A few stroke their own with reverence, as if drawing strength from the ritual. Nicephorus continues, weaving his words with the care of a man crafting a noose. What is a soldier without his badge of manhood? A child. A eunuch. You cringe slightly, but the soldiers nod in grim approval. Byzantium, for all its sophistication, has not yet embraced nuance in gender politics. Historians still argue whether Nicephorus truly believed in the mustache cause or merely used it as a convenient pretext. Some suggest he had long harbored ambitions for the throne and the great shave was simply the crack in the armor he needed. Regardless, tonight, in this smoky hall, it's working. Nicephorus unfurls a battered standard, one used in campaigns against the Bulgars, and the men cheer. The standard, you notice, has been hastily adorned with a crude image of a mustache, inked on in defiance. The soldiers, galvanized, swear oaths, not just to Nicephorus, but to their mustaches, a bizarre and oddly touching ritual. They vow to defend their honor, their dignity, and their upper lips against all enemies, foreign and domestic. You watch, half amused, half horrified, as one soldier jokingly threatens to duel anyone who so much as trims their whiskers. Laughter bubbles up, but it's the brittle kind, teetering on the edge of something darker. And then there's the fringe elements, the pranksters, the poets, the pamphleteers. One soldier, known for his quick wit and quicker tongue, composes a limerick on the spot. There once was an emperor vain, who thought facial hair was a stain. But when he decreed, men rose in their need, and shaved him right out of his reign. The hall explodes in laughter, the kind that binds a group together more tightly than any oath. Yet underneath the humor, a serious, seditious current runs. Nicephorus, mustache bristling like a general's standard, leans in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. We march at dawn. You feel a shiver crawl up your spine. The laughter dies down, replaced by grim silence. The soldiers nod. They understand. Meanwhile, back at the palace, Constantine VI remains oblivious to the scale of the problem he has created. He spends the evening in his private quarters, consulting with advisors who tell him what he wants to hear, that the decree is popular, that the people respect a leader willing to challenge outdated customs. Historians still argue how isolated Constantine really was. Was he shielded by sycophants? Was he willfully ignorant? Or was he, perhaps, quietly panicking behind the silk curtains? You don't know. But what you do know is that Nicephorus is no fool. He understands the power of symbolism, of identity, of shared grievance. And he knows how to turn a bad decision into a rallying cry. The mustache decree, which Constantine had imagined would mark his reign with reformist glory, has instead become a powder keg, and Nicephorus is ready to light the fuse. As you slip out of the barracks and into the cool night air, you notice something strange. The streets are unusually quiet. Too quiet. The usual clatter of carts, the laughter from taverns, even the shouts of night watchmen, all muffled under a heavy blanket of tension. Overhead, the stars wheel lazily in the dark sky, indifferent to the petty squabbles of empires and emperors. But you, tiny figure beneath their cold gaze, Know something monumental is about to happen. You tighten your cloak against the chill and hurry back toward the palace. You want to see the emperor's face when he realizes that a war, not over borders or thrones, but over mustaches, is brewing right under his clean-shaven nose. And you suspect he won't find it nearly as funny as you do. You slip back into the palace just as the first hints of dawn stain the sky a pale, washed-out blue. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of burning oils and polished marble, and the court is already beginning to stir. Servants bustle about, adjusting tapestries, lighting more candles, preparing for another day of political theater. But there's an undercurrent, an invisible thread of unease tugging at the edges of the perfumed halls. You can sense it in the way the guards shift nervously at their posts, hands twitching toward sword hilts, eyes darting toward the entrances as if expecting trouble to come barging through at any moment. And in truth, it will. Constantine VI, oblivious or in denial, sits with his advisors, discussing matters that seem laughably trivial in comparison to the rebellion brewing just beyond the palace walls. You catch snippets of conversation, adjustments to tax codes, minor border disputes, the procurement of more peacock feathers for the imperial fans. But as you hover, pretending to busy yourself with the dusting of a particularly gaudy gold-plated candelabrum, you hear it, a debate about the enforcement of the Moustache decree. One advisor, a wiry man with a thin, whispery voice and a beard that seems almost apologetic in its scruffiness, suggests harsher penalties. Public shaving ceremonies, perhaps. Maybe fines for regrowth. Another, fatter and bolder, proposes an elite squad of inspectors, men tasked solely with patrolling the city for forbidden facial hair. They could be called the depilators. Constantine laughs, and the room chuckles nervously with him. You can almost hear the collective creaking as the courtiers twist themselves into agreeing nods. Historians still argue whether Constantine's laughter was genuine or if it masked the beginnings of dread. The emperor leans back, stroking his utterly bare chin. The people will adjust, he says with a confidence he has not earned. They must. You would pity him if you weren't too busy calculating exactly how badly this was about to go. Outside, in the chill morning mist, General Nicephorus is not laughing. He stands at the head of a force cobbled together from disgruntled soldiers, restless nobles, and even a few grumbling merchants who, while less emotionally attached to their mustaches, are always eager for a good upheaval if it promises tax relief. Their banner is simple but effective, a great black mustache on a field of crimson. You can't help but admire the audacity of it. There's something surreal about watching men march solemnly to war under a symbol that would not look out of place on a barber shop sign. The soldiers are remarkably disciplined, considering the spontaneous nature of the rebellion. They march quietly, boots scuffing against the cobblestones, eyes forward. There's no singing, no drunken boasting, only a grim, determined silence. You notice something else. Most of them have adorned their mustaches with ribbons, beads, or tiny braids, small acts of defiance and pride. It's a parade of whiskered fury, and they mean business. Historians still debate the actual size of Nicephorus's force. Some accounts inflate the numbers to 10,000, others suggest it was a much more modest few hundred. Either way, they are committed, and as they near the palace, their ranks swell with opportunists, discontents, and, in one memorable account, an entire guild of barbers carrying their razors like tiny swords. Nicephorus himself rides at the front, his mustache as glorious as ever, the early light gleaming off his polished armor. He raises a hand, and the army halts. From your vantage point behind a colonnade, you watch as a delegation peels off from the main force and approaches the palace gates. Their leader, a younger officer with a mustache so perfectly curled it could have been sculpted from bronze, steps forward and bangs on the gates with the butt of his spear. "We demand an audience with the emperor," he bellows, his voice carrying across the courtyard. Inside, Constantine's advisors fall silent as a guard bursts into the chamber, breathless and pale. He stammers out the news, and you can almost see the color drain from Constantine's face. "They're here," the guard says, voice cracking. Constantine rises slowly, smoothing his robes with hands that are far steadier than you would expect. For a brief, deluded moment, he seems to believe he can negotiate his way out of this. He gestures imperiously. "Let them in." You stifle a groan. Historians still argue whether this was bravery, hubris, or just a spectacular miscalculation. The delegation is escorted into the throne room, their boots leaving dusty prints on the polished floors. They bow stiffly, formalities must be observed, even in rebellion, and then the lead officer speaks. In the name of the soldiers of Byzantium, we demand the repeal of the imperial decree forbidding mustaches, he says. His mustache twitches with righteous fury. And the restoration of our sacred traditions. Constantine narrows his eyes. You can see him calculating, weighing the risks. He could rescind the decree, swallow his pride, and probably defuse the situation. Instead, he smiles, a thin, tight, princely smile, and says, "Never." The delegation stares at him, stunned. You hold your breath. Your emperor commands your loyalty, Constantine continues, his voice rising. And loyalty is shown not by the length of one's mustache, but by the strength of one's obedience. It's a pretty speech. Shame no one here is in the mood for pretty speeches. The officer stiffens, then gives a curt nod. Without another word, he and his men turn on their heels and march out. The doors close behind them with a heavy, echoing boom. You exhale slowly. Constantine has just signed his own downfall, and possibly yours if you linger too long. Outside, Nicephorus watches the delegation return, sees the set of their jaws, the fury in their eyes. He doesn't need to hear the words. He knows. With a sharp gesture, he signals the advance. The war of the mustaches has begun. You dart out of the palace through a side corridor as the first echoes of boots hitting the flagstones thunder through the courtyard. War, it turns out, is not as dramatic as the old tapestries suggest. There's no immediate clash of swords, no cries of valor. At first, there's just the creaking of gates, the shuffling of sandaled feet, the nervous clatter of armor plates. Constantine's guards, loyal more by paycheck than passion, line the battlements with slack expressions. You can almost hear the mental calculations ticking behind their eyes. Is the emperor's coin worth risking their lives over a mustache decree? Historians still argue whether the guards were truly underpaid or simply unmotivated by the concept of facial hair-related combat. Nicephorus, mustache practically quivering with anticipation, orders his men into position. He's not foolish enough to order a full frontal assault on the heavy palace gates. No, he's a tactician, a man who's spent decades studying the weaknesses of cities and emperors. Instead, he focuses on the softer parts, the supply routes, the side entrances, the water cisterns. His men fan out, silent and swift, like a mustachioed mist engulfing the palace. From your hiding place behind a fruit stall, abandoned in the panic, you watch as soldiers begin scaling walls, slipping into servant entrances, cutting off avenues of escape with chilling efficiency. Some of them sport painted mustaches on their shields. It's all absurdly theatrical, but it's working. Inside, Constantine scrambles to organize a defense. He summons his officers, who arrive looking half-dressed and wholly unimpressed. One by one, they offer up excuses. The soldiers are sympathetic to the rebels, the city gates are compromised, the treasury isn't exactly full enough to buy mercenary loyalty right now. You can almost see the gears jam in Constantine's head. He's trapped, by his own decree, by his own pride, by his spectacular misjudgment of what men will and will not die for. And so, he does what many cornered emperors before him have done. He tries to flee. You trail him at a safe distance, through twisting palace corridors and down into the service tunnels beneath the sprawling complex. The tunnels are dark, damp, and smell faintly of mildew and old regrets. Constantine's guards, to their credit, stick with him, even as their numbers thin. Whether out of loyalty, duty, or sheer lack of better options, they hustle the emperor toward a postern gate, a narrow doorway half hidden behind a collapsed colonnade. It might have worked, might have, if not for the alertness of one of Nicephorus' scouts. A wiry, mustachioed figure lurking in the shadows spots the movement, whistles sharply, and suddenly the tunnel is swarming with rebels. What follows can only generously be called a skirmish. It's messy, chaotic, and over almost before it begins. Constantine's guards, demoralized and outnumbered, surrender after a token resistance. The emperor himself, stripped of his imperial robes and wearing only a plain tunic, looks less like a ruler and more like a lost schoolboy who wandered into the wrong alley. They drag him, blinking in the sunlight, back into the courtyard now thick with smoke from scattered fires. Nicephorus waits, arms folded, mustache gleaming. For a moment, the two men just stare at each other, the distance between them thick with all the unspoken insults and grievances of the past months. Finally, Nicephorus speaks. "Your Majesty," he says, voice laced with more sarcasm than respect. "Your chin is as bare as your throne." A chuckle ripples through the gathered soldiers, low and mean. Historians still debate whether this line is apocryphal, conjured later by gossipy scribes with a taste for poetic justice, or whether Nicephorus truly was that good at on-the-spot humiliation. Either way, it sticks in the historical record, much to Constantine's eternal embarrassment. You expect Constantine to rage, to beg, to bargain. Instead, he simply straightens his shoulders, draws himself up to his full, unimpressive height, and says, "Do what you must." Nicephorus smiles, a slow, wolfish grin, and nods. Later, official proclamations will dress up what happens next as an abdication, a voluntary transfer of power for the good of the empire. You, standing there with the dust swirling around your ankles, know better. Constantine is led away, eventually exiled to a monastery where, according to legend, he grew a rather splendid mustache in defiance. A petty victory, perhaps, but a victory nonetheless. Nicephorus mounts the palace steps, pauses before the great doors, and turns to address the crowd. In the name of tradition, he declares, in the name of honor, in the name of every man who has ever worn his mustache with pride, I accept the burden of the throne. The soldiers cheer. It's not a deafening roar. This is, after all, a coup over facial hair, but it's heartfelt. They chant his name, some twirling their mustaches in unconscious solidarity. Nicephorus strides into the palace, victorious, his mustache practically vibrating with triumph. You follow, keeping to the shadows, wondering what kind of emperor a man like Nicephorus will be. History has many rulers who rose on the strength of armies, riches, or divine right. But this is perhaps the only case of an emperor ascending to power on the back of a well-groomed mustache. You can't decide whether it's hilarious or deeply depressing. Maybe both. You trail behind the new emperor as he parades through the palace corridors, the marble floors echoing each heavy bootstep. Gone is the uncertainty and hesitation of Constantine's reign. Nicephorus walks with the confidence of a man who believes the mustache is destiny. The palace servants scurry to adjust. Banners are hastily changed. The imperial sigil is discreetly updated to incorporate, yes, a subtle mustache motif. You spot one poor artisan struggling to stitch tiny black threads onto the double-headed eagle standard, fingers trembling under the watchful eyes of the newly minted mustache guards. Nicephorus wastes no time issuing his first decrees. Top of the list? The immediate revocation of Constantine's clean-shaven edict. Beards and mustaches are not only permitted, they are encouraged, practically mandated. Officers are ordered to grow out their facial hair if they want to keep their commissions. Soldiers are promised bonuses for superior grooming. You can almost hear the collective sigh of relief as razors are tossed aside with ceremonial disdain. Historians still argue about the extent of Nicephorus's grooming policies. Some suggest it was a full-blown mandate, complete with inspections and fines for those whose beards were patchy or mustaches unsightly. Others argue it was more of an unspoken understanding, a mustache code of honor rather than law. Regardless, overnight, the imperial court transforms into a veritable forest of facial hair. Every senator, courtier, and general scrambles to outdo the others, growing thicker, longer, more elaborately waxed mustaches than ever before. The palace barber shops, once scenes of quiet grooming, become political battlegrounds. Men line up not for trims, but for advice on how best to enhance their whiskered glory. The most skilled barbers become minor celebrities, courted and bribed for their expertise. You pass one shop where a grizzled veteran is having his mustache curled into tight, menacing spirals, his face locked in an expression of grim determination. Another customer demands his mustache be shaped like twin eagle wings, a declaration of his loyalty to the new regime. Nicephorus himself sets the standard. His mustache, already legendary, becomes even more elaborate. Waxed and twisted to sharp points, it's a masterpiece of facial topiary, a living emblem of his rule. Rumors circulate that he employs an entire team of barbers and perfumers just for his upper lip. But not everyone is pleased. In the quieter corners of Constantinople, murmurs of discontent begin to fester. Some merchants grumble about the rising cost of grooming supplies, beeswax, scented oils, combs, all skyrocketing as demand surges. Worse still, for those who cannot grow mustaches, due to youth, genetics, or sheer bad luck, this new regime is exclusionary. You hear of young men desperately rubbing dubious concoctions onto their lips, mixtures of goat milk, honey, and even crushed beetles, hoping to stimulate growth. One desperate noble allegedly commissions a false mustache made of fine horsehair, only to have it fall off in the middle of an important council meeting. Historians still debate whether this incident was isolated or whether an entire black market for fake mustaches blossomed under Nicephorus' rule. And then there's the matter of enforcement. Nicephorus, keen to avoid the chaos that undid Constantine, establishes the mustache inspectors. These are stern-faced men tasked with patrolling the capital, checking citizens for appropriate facial hair. Penalties for non-compliance range from fines to public shaving, a humiliation worse than most can imagine. You watch one such inspection as it unfolds in the marketplace. A nervous merchant, cheeks quivering, fails to produce a sufficient mustache. The inspector frowns, makes a note, and the man is promptly marched to a wooden platform where, to the jeers of the crowd, his stubble is ruthlessly scraped away. It's also absurd, yet no less real for it. Historians still argue whether the inspectors were truly as zealous as later accounts suggest, or whether this too has been exaggerated by a history that finds mustache wars too deliciously ridiculous to let the truth interfere. Regardless, the atmosphere in the city shifts. Where once people wore their faces as they pleased, now mustaches are badges of loyalty, status, and survival. In the imperial court, things grow even stranger. Banquets are held in honor of particularly distinguished mustaches. Awards are given for categories like Most Magnificent Twirl and Best Natural Luster. At one banquet, a general with a mustache so wide it required its own seat was crowned champion of whiskers to riotous applause. You can't help but marvel at it all. The empire, ancient and weary, now finds itself dancing to the whims of facial fashion. Great statesmen debate foreign policy with serious faces framed by increasingly ridiculous mustaches. Generals strategize over battles with half their attention on whether their mustaches are perfectly waxed. Nicephorus seems pleased. His mustache claims, his throne is secure, and his empire, at least for now, is firmly under his thumb and, metaphorically, his whiskers. You, meanwhile, can only wonder how long this curious peace can last. After all, in Byzantium, pride is a dangerous thing, and mustaches, for all their splendor, can only cover so many sins. You find yourself wandering the streets, where the air is thick with the scent of beeswax and rose oil. Constantinople's barbers are enjoying an unprecedented golden age. Everywhere you turn, there are mustache parlors, mustache salons, mustache competitions judged by panels of grim-faced dandies measuring curl precision with rulers. But beneath the festive facade, you sense an undercurrent of growing unease. Facial hair, once a personal matter, has become a political statement, an emblem of loyalty, status, and power. And, as you soon realize, the mustache decree has created more than just comical fashion trends. It has created factions. Factions that, in true Byzantine style, are rapidly learning to hate each other. You duck into a tavern, the golden razor, the sign boasts, hums slightly ask you over the entrance. Inside, the air is heavy with smoke and muttered conversations. Soldiers, merchants, minor nobles, each sporting increasingly elaborate mustaches, sit clustered around low tables, whispering. A man with a mustache so wide it brushes the rim of his wine goblet leans toward his companion. Have you heard? He hisses. They say Nicephorus favors the forked mustache style. Those who wear the spiral curl are being passed over for promotions. His companion, whose mustache indeed spirals like a snail shell on each side, scowls. Favoritism, he mutters. Plain and simple. Historians still argue whether the court truly descended into open rivalry over facial hairstyles, but the evidence is strong enough to suggest something was afoot. New mustache fashions begin appearing, each more ludicrous than the last, each a subtle jab at rival factions. The forked mustache, the spiral curl, the imperial brush, the double point, every style a declaration of allegiance, every whisker bristling with political meaning. Barbers are overwhelmed not just by the demand for grooming, but by the intricate, whispered requests for politically correct mustaches. You sip a thin, sour wine and listen. Another group, younger, brasher, talks loudly about organizing a petition, a demand for mustache freedom, for the right to wear, or not wear, their facial hair as they please. They speak in hushed yet fervent tones, afraid of being overheard by one of the many mustache inspectors now stationed in every quarter of the city. Historians still debate whether the inspectors were an official arm of the state or simply an informal network of loyalists keen to curry favor. Regardless, they are a constant, intimidating presence. And they are not known for their sense of humor. Just last week, a young clerk, tired of the endless inspections, shaved half his mustache and went parading through the streets, a living act of protest. He was arrested within the hour. Rumor has it he was sentenced to a month in the Hall of Mirrors, a disorienting labyrinth where the clean-shaven must confront their shame, though, admittedly, this tale might be embroidered by a few too many wineskins. As you rise from your stool and leave the tavern, the city feels different. There's a tension humming beneath the surface, a tautness to the smiles, a sharpness to the laughter. In the palace, Nicephorus sits on his throne, looking out over the court with a satisfaction that borders on smugness. His mustache today is particularly aggressive, waxed into sharp, almost weapon-like points that glisten under the golden chandeliers. But there's trouble brewing, and he knows it. He's received word of the growing dissatisfaction among the younger nobles and the merchant class, who chafe under the unspoken mustache mandates. Even some of his most loyal generals are grumbling about the endless grooming requirements, the inspections, the fashion mandates. Historians still argue whether Nicephorus had plans to ease the policies or whether he intended to double down and enforce even stricter mustache regulations. What is clear is that, for the first time, cracks are showing. One evening, under the guise of a grand banquet, Nicephorus convenes his advisors. The hall is filled with the low buzz of conversation, the clinking of goblets, the rustling of silk. At the head of the table sits the emperor, mustache magnificent, robes impeccable. He listens as his advisors argue. Loosen the requirements, one murmurs. Let them trim, let them style as they wish. The people grow restless. Never, hisses another. To yield now would be weakness. Worse, an admission of error. Nicephorus strokes his mustache thoughtfully. He knows better than anyone the dangers of appearing weak. After all, it was Constantine's weakness, and his bare upper lip, that had invited rebellion in the first place. Still, he hesitates. Perhaps it's the whisper of common sense. Perhaps it's the distant, mocking echoes of those satirical songs that still circulate in the wine shops, songs that rhyme whisker with risker. Perhaps, just perhaps, it's the growing realization that an empire held together by mustache wax is, fundamentally, a fragile thing. You watch as he finally speaks, voice calm but firm. We shall not retreat, he says. But we shall adapt. A new decree, let the people choose their style, so long as they honor the tradition. A compromise, of sorts. Freedom of style, but no freedom from the mustache itself. The court nods, some in relief, others in veiled frustration. It is a victory for neither side, but a pause, a breather and a battle that is far from over. As you slip out into the cool night air, you can't help but wonder, how long can an empire teeter on the edge of rebellion over something as small, yet as symbolically vast, as a patch of hair on a man's upper lip? Not long, you suspect. You awake the next morning to the familiar bustle of Constantinople. Only now, there's a new kind of cautious energy in the streets. Men eye one another's mustaches with careful calculation. Some mustaches are trimmed close, neat and dignified, others still flare boldly outward in the older, wilder styles. The compromise decree has shifted the battlefield from compliance to style wars. Historians still argue whether Nicephorus's compromise truly stabilized his reign or merely postponed disaster. What's certain is that the capital is now divided not by politics or religion, but by mustache fashion. You watch two merchants nearly come to blows over the perceived insult of one man's feathered split mustache style, which the other, wearing a severe imperial brush, clearly finds offensive. Insults are muttered under breaths, thinly veiled in the language of grooming. In coffeehouses, arguments rage about the superiority of wax versus oil. In barbershops, men line up not just for trims but for full stylistic consultations, holding painted diagrams and whispering urgently about the latest trends. A popular pamphlet circulates listing the 5 acceptable styles and the 7 forbidden styles, although these lists change weekly and are suspected to be satirical, or possibly the work of a particularly mischievous barber's guild. Meanwhile, Nicephorus retreats into the palace, becoming increasingly isolated. Once proud of his mustache mandate, he now finds himself surrounded by sycophants whose facial hair has become ludicrously extravagant. One noble's mustache even dyed a vivid shade of blue in an attempt to stand out. You catch sight of it during a court session and have to suppress a snort. The effect is less noble and more smuff-like. Nicephorus's own mustache grows ever more elaborate, taking on the character of a work of art rather than a simple mark of distinction. It's rumored that he spends hours each morning in his grooming chamber, attended by a staff of barbers, perfumers, and mustache engineers, an actual title created to reflect the technical mastery required. Yet outside the palace, dissatisfaction grows. The army, Nicephorus's original power base, starts to grumble. Soldiers in the field, far from the cosmopolitan absurdity of Constantinople, resent the grooming regulations. They sneer at the city's dandified mustache contests and style pageants, grumbling about the hours wasted on beard oil and wax when they should be preparing for actual battle. One soldier is rumored to have deserted purely out of mustache fatigue, claiming he joined the army to fight, not to curl my lip hair into swans. Historians still argue whether the soldier was real or a colorful invention of later chroniclers, but the sentiment rings true. The more Nicephorus doubles down on style, the more he alienates the practical men who once supported him. In the countryside, things are no better. Rural nobles, proud of their rough, untamed whiskers, bristle at the constant insinuation that true loyalty requires a court-approved coiffure. A particularly rebellious noble in Cappadocia reportedly shears off half his mustache and rides around declaring himself the half-lord, challenging Nicephorus to a duel of dignity. You can't help but admire the audacity. It would be funny if it weren't also, for Nicephorus, a very real threat. Back in the palace, Nicephorus grows increasingly paranoid. He orders his spies, the trimmers they're called, half-mocking, half-fearful, to investigate any noble whose mustache style deviates suspiciously from the latest court trends. Several prominent figures disappear, their mustaches forcibly shaved and displayed as trophies at court. You attend one such ceremony, standing near the back of the crowd. A trembling nobleman is dragged forward, his once glorious mustache shaved in full view of the courtiers. The room watches in tense silence as the barber's blade scrapes cruelly close to the skin. When it's over, the noble stands pale and barefaced, a symbol of disgrace. Nicephorus, seated high upon his throne, merely strokes his own still flourishing mustache and nods. Historians still debate whether Nicephorus truly believed that such displays would cement his authority or whether he was merely trying to terrify his critics into compliance. Either way, the tactic backfires. Instead of fear, it breeds resentment. Silent, seething resentment, the kind that seeps into the foundations of empires like slow poison. As you leave the palace that evening, the city feels heavier, more brittle. The laughter you once heard in taverns has thinned to a cautious murmur. People glance over their shoulders before speaking. Even the children's street games have changed. No more mock mustache contests. Instead, you see a game where one child, pretending to be the emperor, orders the others to shave, and they all run screaming in feigned terror. You smile grimly. Out of the mouths of babes, the empire stands, its marble walls still gleaming in the fading light. But inside those walls, the seeds of rebellion, real rebellion, are being sown. Rebellion not of satire and whispered jokes, but of swords and sieges. Nicephorus, still cosseted by his court of stylists and flatterers, doesn't see it yet. But you do. You've seen this story before, written in the dust of 1,000 fallen kingdoms. And it all started with a mustache. You awake to the dull clang of distant church bells and the soft hum of trouble thickening like fog over the city. By now, everyone can feel it, the court's bloated ceremonies, the exhausted murmurs in the market stalls, even the pigeons seem to flutter a little faster over the forum, as if sensing that Constantinople's usual hum of commerce and ritual is slipping out of tune. Today, you find yourself drifting toward the Blacherny Palace district, where a new kind of rumor swirls, rebellion. Not the polite, whispered kind over cups of watered wine, but real, dirty, steel-clanging rebellion. And it all seems to be organizing under the curious banner of mustaches. Nicephorus's spy network, the Trimmers, is stretched thin, struggling to keep up with the growing underground movement. The rebels have begun calling themselves the Bristlers. Their slogan, hastily carved into hidden corners and alleyway walls, reads, "In hair we trust." It's ridiculous. It's also deadly serious. The Bristlers aren't merely disgruntled citizens, they're veterans, farmers, artisans, even minor nobles, bound together not by political ideology, not by dreams of glory, but by their common hatred of being told how to grow, or not grow, their own mustaches. Historians still argue whether the Bristlers had a real organizational structure or whether it was more of a collective tantrum that somehow spiraled out of control. Either way, It spreads faster than fire in a hayloft. And you, a humble observer of absurdity, can only watch as the city transforms. Secret mustache grooming circles form. Hidden barbershops specialize in subversive styles, creating mustaches so artfully rebellious they practically declare independence on sight. In one shop, you spot a man getting his mustache styled into the shape of a flaming torch, symbolism so unsubtle it's practically a billboard. Meanwhile, Nicephorus grows increasingly erratic. His daily grooming sessions stretch longer and longer. Some say he refuses to appear in public until every hair is waxed to gleaming perfection. The imperial court, once an engine of intrigue and policy, becomes a catwalk of the absurd. At one council meeting, you witness a general wearing a mustache so long it has to be looped around his shoulders like a stole. Nicephorus's paranoia worsens. He orders the expansion of the mustache inspectors, who now have the power not only to fine but to exile anyone who defies the ever-changing imperial mustache guidelines. Even the imperial scribes struggle to keep up with the frequent, often contradictory updates to the Mustache Codex, a hefty document that now rivals the city's tax code in sheer, soul-crushing complexity. Historians still debate how much of this Nicephorus truly believed would stabilize his reign versus how much was simply the inertia of pride and stubbornness. Whatever the case, his grasp on reality, and on power, is slipping. And that brings you to the Battle of Blacherney. It starts not with a grand charge or a siege engine rumbling toward the gates, but with a single slap. A mustache inspector attempts to ticket an off-duty soldier, grizzled, scarred, mustache proudly unkempt, for wearing an unstructured mustache, a violation of the latest, most baffling decree. The soldier, already 4 pints deep into a sour wine lunch, slaps the inspector clean off his feet. The crowd gasps. The inspector scrambles up, sputtering, and flees. The soldier, realizing he has crossed an irreversible line, draws his sword. In minutes, the marketplace swells with unrest. Bystanders, many armed with little more than pruning shears and razor strops, join the soldier. Shouts echo off the marble walls. Someone, historians never agree who, raises a standard, a simple banner dyed black, with a glorious white mustache stitched in the center. The bristlers have their moment. Within an hour, the rebellion ignites across the district. Couriers sprint between rebel cells, shouting coded messages that mostly revolve around hair puns. Clipper to clipper, the beards are free, you overhear one boy yell as he tears through the alleys. Nicephorus's forces try to respond, but the rebels know the terrain, and more importantly, they have the people. Shopkeepers slam shutters to hide the bristlers' movements. Children misdirect soldiers into dead-end streets. Even the city's stray dogs seem to bark louder whenever the Emperor's men get close. You climb a low rooftop and watch the chaos unfold. Plumes of smoke rise as rebel factions torch government barbershops and depilation centers. Mustaches flutter on flags, on banners, even crudely inked onto shields. Nicephorus, informed of the uprising, flies into a rage. He summons his generals, but many are hesitant. Some suspiciously well-groomed officers have quietly defected. Others merely stall, making excuses about needing to re-oil their mustaches before heading into battle. Historians still debate whether Nicephorus could have salvaged the situation with a clever speech or a last-minute concession. But you watch in real time as indecision and ego weld him to his throne. He refuses to negotiate. He refuses to flee. Instead, he orders the palace gates sealed and sends what loyal forces remain to crush the uprising. You watch the lines form, Nicephorus's thinning ranks of palace guards on one side, the bristlers on the other, a sea of defiant mustaches gleaming in the morning sun. And then, the rebels charge. It's a mess, brawling, chaotic, amateur, but it's driven by a rage and ridiculousness so pure that even trained soldiers hesitate. Swords clash, shields splinter. Somewhere in the fray, you spot a man swinging a massive barber's razor like a broadsword. Another wields a comb strapped to a spear shaft. Nicephorus's forces hold for a time, but not for long. The Emperor watches from the balcony of the Great Hall, his mustache twitching nervously. For the first time, it looks less like a symbol of power and more like the last ridiculous vestige of a collapsing regime. And you, silent among the carnage, realize, history isn't always written by the victors. Sometimes, it's written by the absurd. From your perch atop a crumbling statue of some forgotten saint, you witness the chaos below as the rebels, their mustaches bristling like banners, flood into the palace grounds. The palace guards, outnumbered and outmaneuvered, falter. Some drop their weapons and run. Others, perhaps remembering their own humiliating grooming inspections, simply melt into the crowd. You can almost feel the shift in momentum, the heavy, inevitable pull of fate as Nicephorus's once iron grip on power begins to slip. Inside the palace, the emperor paces furiously. The golden tiles beneath his feet have seen centuries of rulers come and go, but few, you imagine, have fretted over facial hair as much as this one. He calls for reinforcements that aren't coming. He sends orders to commanders who've already defected. His mustache, once a gleaming symbol of authority, now droops slightly at the edges, a tragic comedy of hubris rendered in hair. Historians still argue about Nicephorus's final hours, whether he considered surrender, whether he ever truly grasped the absurdity of his situation. Some claim he attempted to rally his remaining supporters with a rousing speech. Others suggest he sat in sullen silence, fingers compulsively twirling his waxed ends into tighter and tighter curls. You picture both possibilities and find them equally plausible. Outside, the Battle of Blacherney rages on. The bristlers, energized by their victories, push forward. At one point, a rebel drummer boy, his mustache drawn on with soot, bangs out a rhythm that seems to carry the rebels' momentum. Boom, 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 like the pounding of history's impatient fist on the palace doors. And then the gates fall. They don't crash down in a grand, cinematic moment. Rather, they creak, groan, and splinter as a battering ram, fashioned, rumor has it, from a barber's pole, finally does its slow, relentless work. The rebels surge in, a tide of determined absurdity. Nicephorus doesn't run. Whatever his faults, he's too proud for that. He stands in the great hall, flanked by the last few loyalists, mustache gleaming defiantly. You note that he's dressed impeccably, robes immaculate, sandals polished, mustache waxed to lethal points. If he's going to fall, he'll do it looking every inch the emperor he imagined himself to be. The rebels burst into the hall, weapons raised, faces set. And for a moment, just a moment, everyone freezes. Because, ridiculous though it is, there's something undeniably impressive about Nicephorus in that instant. He stands straight, chin high, mustache like a battle standard. He says nothing, simply waiting. The silence stretches. Then a rebel, younger than most, steps forward. His mustache is scraggly, barely more than a hopeful suggestion of future grandeur. He raises his sword, points it at Nicephorus, and says, voice shaking slightly, "It's over." Nicephorus stares him down. Slowly, deliberately, he reaches up and strokes his mustache one last time. And then he removes the wax tips, breaking them off with a snap, and lets the rest of the mustache fall naturally against his face. It's an unspoken surrender, and yet somehow more dignified than any throne room abdication ceremony could be. Historians still debate the symbolism of that act, whether it was meant as a gesture of defiance, of acceptance, or simply a man too tired to keep up appearances. The rebels move in, disarming him gently. They don't kill him. Byzantium is too practiced at the art of exile. Nicephorus is stripped of his imperial regalia and, fittingly, escorted to a monastery on the edge of the city. Legend claims the monks there welcomed him not with scripture, but with razors, offering, with twinkling eyes, to shave him properly at last. Nicephorus, it is said, refused and lived the rest of his days growing an even wilder, unkempt mustache than before, a silent, bristling protest against the empire that had rejected him. You leave the palace alongside the crowds, now streaming out with cheers and laughter. The black mustache banners wave triumphantly in the breeze. In the streets, people celebrate, not just the fall of a ruler, but the victory of the individual against the ridiculous tyranny of enforced grooming. And of course, they celebrate with mustache contests. It's Byzantium, after all. As night falls, bonfires are lit across the city. You sit by one, listening as people recount the day's events, embellishing and laughing. They sing songs, too, new ones, fresh ones, with lyrics that mock the empire's bizarre descent into mustache politics. One favorite line keeps cropping up: he ruled with wax, but fell with a laugh. Historians still argue whether the mustache rebellion truly reshaped the empire or was merely a strange, transient hiccup in its long, tumultuous history. Some see it as a parable about vanity, others as a cautionary tale of tyranny in the most unexpected places. You, staring into the flickering fire, think perhaps it's both. Or maybe, just maybe, it's a reminder that sometimes, history pivots not on swords or treaties, but on the absurd. and all you can do is sit back and marvel at how a few inches of hair managed to bring down an emperor. You stretch in the cool night air as the fires die down to embers, the celebratory chants giving way to the soft crackle of wood and the low murmur of exhausted voices. The city sleeps now, cradled by the stars, but the work of rebuilding an empire, mustaches and all, has only just begun. In the days that follow, Constantinople hums with activity. The bristlers establish a provisional council, hastily assembled and hilariously mismatched, former generals, merchant princes, prominent barbers, and even a poet known primarily for his epic odes to facial hair. They gather in the hippodrome, their meetings held under the watchful eyes of statues so ancient even their stone beards have crumbled with age. Their first order of business is clear: set guidelines for facial hair. Again, historians still argue whether this was a sincere attempt at governance or simply the result of being so obsessed with mustaches that they couldn't help but legislate them. Either way, you watch with weary amusement as a decree is issued. All citizens are free to grow, groom, or shave their mustaches and beards as they please. No restrictions shall be placed on facial hair, save that it not interfere with the duties of a soldier or civil servant. Waxing contests are to be encouraged but not mandatory. Freedom at last, and yet, as you stroll through the marketplaces, you notice a curious phenomenon: most men keep their mustaches anyway. Some even grow them wilder than before. It's as if, having fought so fiercely for the right to wear or not wear facial hair, the people have realized it was never really about the hair. It was about the choice. In a corner of the forum, you overhear a barber lamenting the decline in business. No one wants fancy styles anymore, he moans. They just want it natural. His colleague nods sagely, as if he's been predicting this all along. Still, the barbers adapt. They turn to new markets, selling oils, combs, and, inevitably, novelty mustache ornaments. By the end of the month, you can buy tiny jeweled charms to braid into your whiskers, or scented oils promising to make your facial hair smell of lavender, myrrh, or, bizarrely, freshly baked bread. Historians still debate whether this explosion of mustache-themed consumer goods was a sign of cultural renewal or the first step in an inevitable descent into commodified absurdity. The city's mood remains buoyant, for now. But not everyone is pleased with the mustache détente. In the eastern provinces, rumors swirl of discontent. Not because of the freedom of facial hair, but because many see the capital's antics as a sign of weakness. Mustache rebellions might be amusing, but they don't defend the empire's borders from Bulgars or Arabs. One warlord, a man with a famously clean-shaven face, by choice, not decree, begins gathering forces. His message is simple: Byzantium has lost its dignity. Its rulers squabble over hair while enemies sharpen their swords. You wonder if he's right. Still, for now, the city enjoys its peace. Festivals spring up overnight, many of them cheekily mustache-themed. The Festival of the Whisker sees citizens parade through the streets with outrageous facial hair creations. One man even trains a parrot to perch in his mustache, drawing raucous cheers. You wander through one such festival, dodging a man whose mustache has been waxed into the shape of a ship, complete with tiny sails. Children run by, wearing fake mustaches too large for their faces, giggling uncontrollably. There's even a play, a satirical farce called The Emperor's Moustache, which draws enormous crowds. You sit in the back row and watch as a gleeful actor in an oversized false mustache struts about the stage, delivering grand speeches about the virtues of chin baldness before being unceremoniously deposed by a chorus of bristling townsfolk. It's absurd, but it's cathartic. The people laugh until they cry, purging months of tension and fear in great heaving waves of hilarity. Historians still debate whether the play had political significance or was simply a way for the people to reclaim their dignity through laughter. Probably both. And what of Nicephorus? From what you hear, he settles into monastic life with surprising ease. Stripped of power and pretense, he grows his mustache out until it resembles a wild, tangled thicket, refusing to trim or tame it. Visitors describe him as serene, even cheerful, free, at last, from the burdens of empire and appearances. He spends his days tending a small garden, praying, and, rumor has it, writing a treatise on the history and philosophy of facial hair. The manuscript, on the whiskered virtues, becomes a minor cult classic among future scholars, though it's largely mocked by contemporaries. You like to think of him there, scratching away with an ink-stained quill, mustache bristling defiantly in the monastery breeze. In the end, perhaps Nicephorus achieved a kind of victory. Not on the battlefield, not in the throne room, but in the stubborn, ridiculous insistence that something as trivial as a mustache could matter. And maybe, you think, it does. You stroll through the city, past the market stalls and the still swaying banners, past children with soot-drawn mustaches and merchants hawking mustache waxes in 10 different scents. The sun sets behind the domes and towers of Constantinople, painting the sky with gold and violet. And as the city settles into sleep once more, you wonder, what new absurdity will the empire dream up next? But that's a story for another night. Morning unfurls over Constantinople like a soft sigh, the city blinking awake beneath a sky scrubbed clean by night breezes. You wander the newly calm streets, where the aftermath of Moustache-fueled revolution has left curious traces. Walls once defaced with slogans and drawings of defiant whiskers are being repainted. Shops reopen their shutters cautiously, unsure whether a mustache inspection is still lurking just around the corner. For the first time in months, barbers resume ordinary business, basic trims, clean shaves, tidy haircuts. The era of elaborate facial topiary has passed, at least for now. Yet, beneath this newfound calm, you can sense the city's wariness. Freedom, it seems, has come with its own price. You stop at a bakery where the latest novelty is on full display, mustache bread. Loaves twisted into mustache shapes, dusted with flour to mimic the proud gray of a seasoned general's whiskers. You chuckle and buy one, gnawing on the absurdity as you walk. Historians still argue whether this period, brief, intense, and largely ridiculous, actually left any lasting mark on the Byzantine Empire. Some dismiss it as a footnote, an embarrassing blip. Others insist it's a glimpse into the way power can shift for reasons no grand historian would dare take seriously. And you? You suspect they're all missing the point. Further down the street, a crowd gathers around a street performer. He wears a fake mustache so long it trails behind him like a train. He juggles fruits, each painted with little mustaches, and recites satirical verses. An emperor, bold, whacks his way to disgrace. His reign left in shambles, his chin a blank space. Now we laugh at the past, as we munch on mustache bread, and dream of new rulers who rule with their head. The crowd claps and tosses coins into a battered cap. You smile, but the words linger longer than the laughter. Over the next few weeks, the Provisional Council, awkwardly dubbed the Senate of Whiskers by wags, tries to steer the empire back to something resembling normalcy. They repeal the most egregious mustache laws, disband the mustache inspectors, and even hold a public burning of the Mustache Codex, which one senator sets alight with a flourish while twirling his own modest, regulation-free mustache. But governance is harder than rebellion. It turns out running a city, let alone an empire, involves more than managing hair policies. Grain prices fluctuate dangerously. The Navy demands back pay. And on the horizon, those enemy warlords still loom, unimpressed by the empire's brief, whiskered madness. Worse, old habits die hard. In the council, arguments break out, not over facial hair this time, but over sandals. Open-toed or closed? A minor detail, but you can sense the same stubbornness resurfacing, like a mustache that refuses to stay shaved. Historians still argue whether Byzantium's penchant for obsessing over the trivial was its greatest weakness or an odd sort of strength, a coping mechanism in an empire perpetually teetering between glory and ruin. You think of Nicephorus, now quietly pruning grapevines in his monastery. Word has it that his treatise, on the whiskered virtues, has been smuggled into the city and is being passed around in secret among university students and disaffected nobles. One chapter, they say, argues that grooming, when elevated to an art form, reflects the discipline needed to govern well. Another chapter, less popular, claims that the mustache is a mirror of the soul, and a crooked mustache reveals a crooked heart. You find it almost comforting to imagine him there, pen scratching across parchment, mustache wagging slightly as he pens his peculiar philosophy. As the weeks turn into months, the fervor fades. Constantinople, like a restless sleeper rolling over, shifts back into its usual patterns. Trade resumes. Diplomats come and go. Messengers on swift horses bring news from the provinces, most of it troubling. And the people? The people move on, as they always do. Some keep their mustaches, others shave them. A few even experiment with clean-shaven cheeks and upper lips, daring the judgment of their neighbors. Nobody cares much anymore. Well, almost nobody. One afternoon, you stumble upon a small, ragtag gathering in the old hippodrome. A group of die-hard bristlers holds a commemorative ceremony for the Great Shave Rebellion, as they've grandly dubbed it. They light candles, say a few words about freedom and dignity, and, inevitably, hand out awards for the best mustache in 3 categories: most resilient, most heroic, and most artistic. You watch from a distance, smiling. It's all wonderfully absurd, and yet, oddly touching. Historians still argue whether events like these were sincere commemorations or just excuses to gather and drink under the guise of patriotism. You suspect, as always, it's a bit of both. The sky darkens. You head home, the distant sound of laughter and clanking goblets trailing behind you. As you walk, you find yourself wondering about the lessons of the Mustache War. That power can be toppled not just by swords, but by symbols. That pride can blind even the cleverest rulers. That sometimes, people need to fight for the right to be ridiculous. And maybe, just maybe, that a little absurdity isn't a weakness, but a strange, stubborn kind of strength. The empire endures, as it always has, creaking under the weight of its own traditions and contradictions, but still standing. And who knows? Maybe someday, some future emperor will look back on these days, not with shame, but with a wry smile, and resolve to rule not by decree or fashion, but with a little humility. Maybe. As the season turns and the crisp scent of autumn settles over Constantinople, you find the city wearing its new normal like a slightly ill-fitting tunic. Life resumes, but the oddity of the Mustache Rebellion lingers in strange and often hilarious ways. In the university districts, scholars and students, those perennial agitators of convention, begin hosting facial freedom lectures. These are ostensibly serious discussions about personal liberty, but quickly devolve into competitive debates over who can grow the most absurd facial hair in the shortest amount of time. You attend one such event, held in the open-air courtyard of a philosophy school. The gathering begins with a respectable enough lecture on the concept of bodily autonomy in the Roman legal tradition. But not 10 minutes in, someone challenges the speaker to a beard-off, and the afternoon descends into good-natured chaos involving goat hair wigs, honey as a makeshift adhesive, and a great deal of laughing until wine spills down tunics. Historians still argue whether these gatherings were political statements or simply an excuse for the youth to thumb their noses at authority in the most ludicrous way imaginable. Regardless, you enjoy the spectacle. Meanwhile, the city's poets and playwrights mine their rebellion for every morsel of satire they can. Theaters brim with audiences eager for a laugh at their own expense. New comedies debut with titles like The Taming of the Statue and Much Ado About Mutton Chops. One particularly popular play, The Whiskered Tyrant, depicts a thinly veiled caricature of Nicephorus, his mustache so oversized that it trips him on stage, leading to increasingly ridiculous pratfalls and eventual exile to a goat farm. The city eats it up. Even some senators attend incognito, snorting into their sleeves at the antics. Still, not everyone is content with laughter. Tensions simmer quietly in the military camps outside the city walls. Veterans grumble over their wine about the empire's priorities. "We're the shield of the empire," one says bitterly as you pass by, and all the court cares about is facial hair and plays. You nod silently. You know that, despite the happy faces and joking crowds, the empire remains vulnerable. Enemies do not wait for foolishness to pass. They sharpen their swords in silence, just beyond the mountains and across the seas. Back in the palace, the Senate of Whiskers grapples with the problem of succession. They ruled easily enough when the goal was to unseat Nicephorus, but governing a fractious empire requires more than revolutionary zeal and elaborate grooming. Several names are floated for emperor. Some too young, others too old. Some with mustaches deemed too flamboyant, others clean-shaven, a dangerous mark in the post-rebellion atmosphere. Historians still debate whether it was intentional irony or sheer exhaustion that led to the selection of Basileus the Modest, a low-ranking noble with a reputation for even temper, sharp intellect, and a completely unremarkable mustache. Neither too large nor too small, it was, if mustaches could be said to have personalities, aggressively mediocre. Basileus accepts the throne reluctantly. At his coronation, he gives a speech not about glory or conquest, but about balance. The empire, he says, mustache twitching as he speaks, must not be governed by the fashions of the moment, but by the enduring needs of its people. It's not the rousing oration some hoped for, but the city, weary of chaos, finds comfort in its ordinariness. Basileus issues no decrees about grooming, no pronouncements on facial hair. He quietly disbands the remaining mustache committees and redirects their energies toward more practical matters: fortifications, food supply, taxation reform. Historians still argue whether Basileus's rise marked the true end of the Mustache Wars or whether it was simply a lull before the next absurdity. Empires, after all, have long memories and short attention spans. As for Nicephorus, he remains ensconced in his monastery, out of politics but not out of history. Rumors suggest that he receives copies of the satirical plays and secretly chuckles at the exaggerations of his reign. One chronicler claims that when asked about his legacy, Nicephorus merely stroked his wild, unkempt mustache and said, "At least they remember me." And indeed, he is remembered. Moustache Day becomes a yearly tradition in Constantinople, a day of silliness and reflection when citizens are encouraged to wear fake mustaches and laugh at the follies of the past. Markets fill with moustache-shaped sweets, and children parade through the streets twirling paper mustaches on sticks. You watch the first such celebration with a mixture of amusement and melancholy. It's ridiculous, of course, but it's also cathartic. The people take their history, however absurd, and turn it into something communal, something joyful. And perhaps, you think, that's the real legacy of the Mustache War. Not the decrees or battles or wax tips, but the reminder that even the most powerful of empires are, at their core, human, and that humans, for all their flaws, can find resilience in laughter. As the sun dips below the city walls, casting the streets in a warm, golden glow, you head home, past shops closing their shutters and taverns spilling music into the night air. You pass a boy balancing a broom under his nose like a mustache, giggling with his friends. You smile. Because in a city that once went to war over a patch of hair, it's good to see that some things, especially the capacity for a good, hearty laugh, never really change. Morning sunlight glints off the domes and spires of Constantinople, and you find yourself wandering through a city that feels almost normal again, if, by normal, you mean only lightly obsessed with mustaches instead of hopelessly consumed. Merchants hawk their wares, spices, silks, waxes, and oils, some still capitalizing on the mustache craze by advertising beard-friendly formulas, though the fervor has clearly cooled. You stop at a stall where a wizened old vendor is selling small wooden figurines of famous figures, each delicately carved with distinct mustaches. There's Nicephorus, of course, his mustache exaggerated to absurd proportions, and Basileus the modest, whose tiny, unassuming facial hair makes his figurine look almost apologetic. The vendor, noticing your interest, grins and tries to sell you a set of all the emperor's mustaches intact. You politely decline, but not without a chuckle. Historians still argue about the cultural impact of the Mustache Wars. Some claim they sparked an age of greater personal freedoms, while others dismiss them as a symptom of Byzantium's slow decline. But here on the streets, you see something else: resilience. The ability to turn even the most ridiculous of misadventures into tradition, into memory, into something that binds a people together. You continue toward the old Senate building, now repurposed as the administrative center for Basileus's government. It's a hub of slow, steady work, tax reforms, military provisioning, grain distribution, boring, necessary tasks that hold empires together far better than fashion edicts ever could. Inside, Basileus presides over a council session. You slip into the back, unnoticed, as discussions drone on about road repairs and diplomatic missions. Basileus, his plain mustache neatly trimmed, listens carefully, speaking rarely but decisively. At one point, a senator proposes a bill to declare Basileus's mustache the official model for all imperial imagery. A ripple of laughter moves through the room, and even Basileus smiles, but he shakes his head. "No more decrees about mustaches," he says. "Let history laugh enough without our help." Historians still debate whether this was an offhand comment or a deliberate statement of policy. Either way, it marks a clear end to the empire's flirtation with facial hair legislation. As you leave the Senate, you pass a group of children playing in the square. They've fashioned sticks and twine into makeshift mustaches, reenacting the great mustache battle with the earnestness only children can muster. You overhear one boy declare himself Emperor Moustachios the Magnificent before being deposed by another wielding a broom handle. They collapse in giggles, and you can't help but smile. Even now, the absurdity of the past is shaping the imagination of the future. Elsewhere in the city, the memories linger in smaller, quieter ways. In a modest monastery garden on the outskirts, Nicephorus tends his grapevines. His once grand mustache has, by all accounts, been allowed to grow wild and free, a final, silent protest against the rigidity that once defined his reign. A visiting scholar records a meeting with the former emperor. When asked what lesson he had learned from his downfall, Nicephorus reportedly said, "A man can command armies and build cities, but tell him how to wear his hair, and you will see his true heart." Historians still argue about the authenticity of this quote, but it survives, etched into countless manuscripts, a testament to the enduring fascination with this strange, short rule. You pass a scribe's shop where copies of On the Whiskered Virtues are still copied by hand, mostly as curiosities. Young scholars argue in the corner about the merits of Nicephorus's mustache philosophy, though mostly, you suspect, because it's more entertaining than debating grain tariffs. Back in the forum, the usual buzz of trade and gossip resumes. Life, real life, never stops for long, not even for revolutions. A fisherman haggles over nets. A baker peddles loaves in the shapes of animals instead of mustaches now. Street performers play their flutes, and dogs chase pigeons with joyful abandon. You pause, taking it all in. The city has moved on. The empire has moved on. But somewhere deep in the collective memory of Byzantium, the mustache war has left its mark, not a scar, not exactly, but a wrinkle of history that refuses to smooth up completely. And maybe that's fitting. After all, empires are not only built on battles and treaties, on laws and edicts. They are built on the strange, the absurd, the moments of collective madness that somehow, inexplicably, bind people together. You step into a wine shop to escape the midday sun, and there above the counter hangs a painted wooden sign, The Whiskered Fool, a new name, a playful nod to history. You order a cup and sit by the window, watching the world drift by. And for the first time in a long while, you allow yourself a deep, contented sigh. Because you know, tonight, under the stars, the people will tell stories. And some of those stories will be about emperors and armies. And some will be about a war over mustaches. And both kinds of stories, in their own way, will be true. You linger in the wine shop as the afternoon wears on, sipping from your cup and half listening to the quiet hum of conversation. The patrons swap news and jokes, sometimes both in the same breath. Here, history is not the grand, polished thing of scholars and scribes. It's something more intimate, woven into daily life like the crack in an old jug or the worn sole of a trusted sandal. At the next table, two old men argue over whether Nicephorus's mustache was truly the finest the empire has ever seen or merely a glorified broom bristle. You smile into your cup. Even now, the mustache war lives on, not in bitterness or regret, but in the easy banter of a city that has decided to wear its past like a comfortable old cloak. Historians still argue about the cultural fallout of the rebellion. Some claim it ushered in an era of toleration for personal eccentricities. Others see it as proof of Byzantium's tendency toward petty squabbles in times that demanded focus and discipline. But you can tell, just from sitting here, that the truth is somewhere in between. You finish your drink and step back into the street, where the city's lifeblood, trade, pulses steadily. Merchants call out prices in a dozen languages, silks flutter in the breeze, the sharp tang of salt fish hangs in the air, and every third stall seems to sell some kind of mustache-themed trinket still. Relics of a rebellion that refuses to be entirely forgotten. You pass a small bookstall where, alongside scrolls on military tactics and theological treatises, sits a slim volume titled The Mustache Rebellion, a cautionary comedy. Its author, a minor court scribe who survived the chaos by staying well out of sight, has spun the events into a biting satire. You leaf through it idly. The scribe has taken great liberties, turning Nicephorus into a vain fool who waxed his mustache more often than he read state reports, and his courtiers into a chorus of groveling sycophants, each with increasingly ludicrous facial hair. Historians still debate the historical accuracy of the account. It's clearly exaggerated, but its spirit is undeniable. The scribe understood, as all good chroniclers do, that sometimes history's most enduring lessons come not from dry records but from laughter. Further down the street, you hear the clang of hammers and the shouts of laborers. Repairs are underway on a section of the city wall damaged not by enemy siege, but by the overflow of crowds during the height of the rebellion. There's something reassuring in that image. The empire, battered not by invaders but by its own people's absurd determination to be heard, now patching itself up. In the imperial palace, Basileus the Modest presides over a meeting of the Senate. His reign so far has been marked by a kind of cautious pragmatism, no grand proclamations, no sweeping reforms, just the slow, steady business of keeping Byzantium running. You manage to slip into the public gallery and watch as he debates grain tariffs with a senator so old he might remember emperors who wore actual battle scars instead of elaborately groomed mustaches. There's a weariness to Basileus, but also a resilience. He doesn't seek applause or adoration. He listens carefully, speaks sparingly, and never, ever mentions grooming practices. His mustache, trimmed, unremarkable, precisely average, seems almost a political statement in itself. We are done with vanity. Yet the past lingers. In the courtyards and baths, in the crowded taverns and quiet marketplaces, people still swap mustache jokes. A mosaic artist unveils a grand new piece for the Senate building, a depiction of Constantinople's patron saints, each sporting magnificently ridiculous mustaches. It's a clear jab at the recent madness, and it draws both gasps and stifled giggles from the senators. No one orders its removal. You think about that as you leave the palace and wander back toward the harbor. The ships sway gently in their moorings, and the gulls will overhead, crying out their eternal complaints. Byzantium has survived. Not just the rebellion, but the far more dangerous thing that followed, the reckoning. It's easy, you realize, for an empire to be shaken by wars and invasions. Harder still is surviving its own silliness. To laugh at itself, to endure the indignity of having fought over mustaches, and to move on. Maybe that's why Byzantium, despite all predictions, endures century after century. Not because of its armies or walls or gold, but because of its sheer, stubborn, ridiculous resilience. You pause at the edge of the water, watching the sunset turn the sea to molten gold. Behind you, the city hums and sighs and chuckles. Somewhere, a merchant haggles over the price of a mustache comb. Somewhere else, a child tries to glue horsehair to his upper lip. And you? You simply stand there, breathing in the salty air, feeling the weight of history, not as a burden, but as a curious, slightly ridiculous companion. Because sometimes, you think, history isn't about glory or tragedy. Sometimes it's about mustaches. And sometimes, that's enough. As another day dawns over Constantinople, you notice how the city, though worn by the storm of absurdity it survived, carries on with a certain peculiar dignity. The markets swell with life, laughter bubbling here and there, as if the very stones of the streets are amused at what they have witnessed. Even the imperial guards, once so stiff and polished, now seem more relaxed, their armor gleaming less aggressively, their mustaches trimmed to manageable, regulation-free lengths. You find yourself drifting through the crowded forums, watching artisans paint frescoes and mosaics that carefully omit, or cheekily emphasize, whiskered faces. In one corner, an artist sketches a grand battle scene, and, if you squint closely, you spot that each soldier, regardless of rank or nation, sports a mustache, even the horses. Historians still argue whether this trend, mustaches sneaking into art, sculpture, and coinage, was a deliberate homage to the rebellion or simply a cultural in-joke that Byzantium never quite shook off. Either way, it endures, stubborn and faintly ridiculous. As you meander along the bustling avenues, you overhear a group of philosophers at a cafe deep in argument, not about the soul or the divine, but about whether a mustache could symbolize virtue or pride. One earnest young man argues that the mustache represents the tension between individual freedom and collective order, a thin line bristling across the face of empire itself. You sip watered wine and marvel at the earnestness with which Byzantium can intellectualize anything, even the fallout of one man's grooming decree. In the heart of the city, the Senate reconvenes. Basileus the Modest continues his careful governance, shepherding Byzantium through repairs, treaties, and reforms with the slow, deliberate hand of a man determined not to leave his name emblazoned in golden letters or caricatured in the statued frescoes. Yet even Basileus, cautious as he is, cannot escape the mustache's lingering legacy. One day, in what has now become an annual tradition, the Senate holds a quiet, almost reverent commemoration. Not for a battle, not for a treaty, but for the peaceful absurdity that allowed the empire to exhale and reset itself. The Day of the Whisker is declared, not an official holiday, of course, but a day marked by mock debates, playful reenactments, and elaborate mustache-growing contests. You attend the first such event, slipping into the crowd as the senators take turns donning fake mustaches and delivering bombastic mock speeches, extolling the virtues of wax and combs. There's even a race, competitors sprinting across the hippodrome, balancing false mustaches on their noses without using their hands. You watch a dignified magistrate trip over his own feet and go sprawling, fake mustache fluttering to the ground like a defeated standard. The crowd roars with laughter. Historians still argue whether the day of the whisker strengthened the empire's identity or simply distracted it from deeper fractures. But you can tell that the laughter binds them, nobles and merchants, soldiers and scribes, all alike in their ridiculousness. Later that evening, as the city quiets and the last of the mock parades drift toward home, you pass by a small shrine tucked into a forgotten corner. There, a modest candle flickers beneath a simple stone carving, a face adorned with an impressive, curling mustache. You smile. It's a joke, of course, a private wink at the past. But it's also something more. A recognition that, sometimes, even the most ridiculous things deserve to be remembered. Far to the east, storm clouds gather beyond the empire's borders. Threats loom, as they always do. Byzantium's enemies sharpen swords and draft plans. And within the empire, the usual grumblings of factions and ambitions stir once more. But here, now, the city is at peace. And not just because the armies are resting or the coffers are full, but because the people, in their wisdom, have learned to laugh at themselves. You wander toward the harbor, where fishing boats rock gently against the tide. A sailor, mustache flecked with salt, waves lazily as you pass. Further along, two dockhands, one clean-shaven, one bristling with a thick beard, share a joke and a flask. No inspections, no decrees, no rebellions. Just life, simple and stubborn and human. Historians still argue whether the mustache war marked the beginning of Byzantium's slow unraveling or whether it served, in some strange way, to tighten the empire's weave, to make it more flexible, more resilient. You think about it as you sit at the edge of the quay, feet dangling above the dark, lapping water. Maybe history isn't a straight road, paved only by grand victories and bloody battles. Maybe it's a meandering path, full of ridiculous detours and unlikely stops, where even the most trivial absurdities leave their mark. And maybe, just maybe, a mustache really can change the world. You lean back, watching the stars appear one by one, and let the cool breeze carry the faint, lingering scent of beeswax and old laughter. Morning drifts in quietly, a silken veil of mist softening the city's edges. Constantinople stretches and yawns, its streets slow to fill, its markets unhurried, as if even the stones are savoring the peace. You wander aimlessly, past the old forums and fountains, past worn statues whose faces bear the remnants of 1,000 hurried hand chisels, and if you look closely, you can spot the faint outlines of mustaches that were added by mischievous rebels during the height of the war. They've been weathered by rain and wind, but still they cling to the marble cheeks like a secret. The city is healing, but not forgetting. You find yourself at a quiet garden tucked behind the Church of the Holy Wisdom. It's a sanctuary, almost untouched by the chaos that had gripped the empire months ago. Here, the flowers bloom with casual defiance, and the air smells of wet earth and jasmine. Sitting on a low stone bench is an old man, a worn cloak around his shoulders, a thick, graying mustache drooping over his lip. He feeds the pigeons with slow, deliberate motions. You recognize him, though only distantly, one of Nicephorus's former advisors, one who had disappeared when the tides turned. He glances up at you, his eyes sharp despite his age. "Funny thing," he says, as if you'd asked. "We thought it was about power, about tradition, about loyalty." He tosses a handful of crumbs. Turned out, it was about none of those things. It was about dignity. You nod, and he chuckles. Or vanity. Historians will argue it for centuries. You smile because you know he's right. They will argue, over motivations, over outcomes, over who was brave and who was foolish. And none of it will ever quite capture what it felt like to be here, watching an empire unravel not with swords, but with razors and wax pots. The old man leans back, sighs, and closes his eyes, a ghost of a grin on his weathered face. You lead him there, surrounded by pigeons and fading sunlight, and head toward the merchant quarter. Life has returned with its usual vigor. Vendors shout out prices, children chase each other through narrow alleys, and artisans ply their trades, hammering and weaving and carving as they have for centuries. But something has shifted. In the workshops, young sculptors carve figures not of gods and emperors, but of common men, soldiers, farmers, fishermen, all depicted with simple, honest faces, mustached or not. In the songhouses, Ballads once reserved for heroes now sing of ordinary people who once defied an emperor with little more than stubbornness and a healthy sense of the ridiculous. Historians still argue whether the rebellion planted the first seeds of a more egalitarian spirit within the empire. Some scoff at the idea. Others trace a slow, winding line from the Moustache Wars to later reforms that gave broader rights to the lower classes. You aren't so sure of grand theories. What you see is a people less quick to bow, less eager to obey without question. A people who have learned that even the smallest things, like the hair on a man's lip, can become symbols of something greater if given the right spark. And you see a city more willing to laugh at itself. A city that carries its absurd past not as a burden but as a badge, a reminder that survival, in the end, often belongs not to the strongest or the smartest, but to those who can endure their own foolishness with grace. You drift toward the harbor as dusk deepens, the masts of ships standing like a forest of slender spears against the darkening sky. A street performer stands on a barrel, balancing a broom across his upper lip like a massive mustache, to the delight of a small crowd. You pause to watch as he struts back and forth, imitating emperors and generals, tumbling into exaggerated pratfalls that leave the audience in stitches. You recognize one of his lines, an old satirical chant that had once gotten people arrested, now sung openly, joyfully. They waxed and they waltzed. They measured and fought, till whiskers defeated what swords never caught. The crowd laughs and tosses coins into a cap at his feet. You stand there a moment longer, feeling the laughter ripple through the gathering, feeling the city breathe around you, wiser, wearier, and yet still wonderfully alive. The empire endures. Not because of its legions, or its gold, or even its emperors, but because it can laugh, and learn, and keep moving, mustaches and all. You turn from the harbor and head back toward the heart of the city, where lamplighters spark tiny stars along the streets and the scents of roasting meats and fresh bread drift on the evening air. Behind you, the street performer bows low, broom mustache slipping slightly, to a round of applause. And ahead, Constantinople waits, ancient and absurd, weary and wise, ready for whatever comes next. The city settles into a late evening hush, the kind of quiet that hums beneath the surface rather than silencing it. You walk through narrow alleys where lamplight pools in golden puddles, where cats dart between shadows, and old men lean on canes to tell stories they've already told 100 times. You turn a corner and find yourself at a small wine shop, unremarkable except for the faded mural on the wall outside. It's old now, its colors muted by years of sun and rain, but you can still make out the figures, a row of solemn-looking men, each with a mustache styled differently, curled, braided, forked, or simple and straight. Above them, a single line of text in worn letters. Variety is the glory of the empire. It's a relic from the aftermath of the Moustache Wars, painted during that brief, exuberant period when Constantinople celebrated the ridiculousness it had survived. And somehow, it's still here, quietly reminding anyone who passes of that peculiar chapter in the city's life. Historians still debate whether the artist was making a joke or offering genuine political commentary. Maybe both, maybe neither. In Byzantium, it's always hard to tell. Inside the wine shop, the air is thick with smoke and the scent of warm spiced wine. You find a seat in a quiet corner and listen. The talk tonight is less about mustaches and more about the usual concerns: grain prices, merchant taxes, border skirmishes far to the east. Yet you hear it there, tucked into the casual banter, a new caution, a new sense that even the smallest things can ripple outward, gathering force until they shake the very foundations of the empire. An older merchant leans across a table to murmur to a younger man, "Don't laugh at the little things. It's the little things that bring empires to their knees." The younger man nods, perhaps not fully understanding, but wise enough to pretend he does. You sip your wine and wonder how many more times Byzantium will have to relearn that lesson. Beyond the wine shop, the city's grander ceremonies continue. Tomorrow is the festival of the whisker again, and preparations are already underway. Artisans set up stalls hawking mustache combs carved from ivory, jars of wax in colors ranging from natural brown to gleaming gold, and tunics embroidered with tiny, tasteful mustaches along the hems. But the tone is different now. No longer frenzied, no longer mandatory. It's celebratory, affectionate, a self-aware nod to the past, not an attempt to relive it. You walk past a troupe of musicians rehearsing a new ballad. The chorus drifts to your ears. Not by sword, nor law, nor might, but by the hair, we won the fight. We learned to laugh, we learned to bend. and thus the empire did not end. It's catchy. You find yourself humming it as you stroll through the torchlit streets. Historians still debate whether Byzantium's ability to find humor in its own missteps was a strength or a weakness. Some argue that laughing too much at power erodes respect for it. Others claim that laughter is the empire's true shield, thicker than any wall, sharper than any blade. You think of Nicephorus, the once great emperor reduced to a figure of tragicomic memory, and wonder what he would think if he could hear the songs sung in his honor, or at least in his mustache's honor. You like to imagine he'd laugh. Maybe bitterly. Maybe not. The night grows cooler as you wind your way up the slopes toward the old palace gardens. The stars are sharp and clear above, and for a moment, standing among the trimmed hedges and marble fountains, you feel the weight of all that has passed. All that has endured. Empires fall, you know. They always do. But Byzantium stumbles, bickers, mocks itself, and somehow carries on. Maybe that's the secret. Not invincibility, but resilience. The ability to be ridiculous and still survive. You sit on a low wall overlooking the city and watch as the lights blink out, one by one, until only a scattering remains, like embers in a vast hearth. The city sleeps. And tomorrow, it will wake to another day, another chance to laugh, to endure, to remember. You close your eyes, breathing in the cool, faintly salty air, and wonder, what absurdity will history serve up next? Whatever it is, you're certain the people of Constantinople will meet it the way they always have, mustaches bristling, laughter ready, stubborn hearts beating steady beneath the marble and silk. You awaken the next morning to the soft sounds of the city stirring, vendors arranging their stalls, children's laughter drifting up from the alleys, the rhythmic pounding of hammers repairing the city walls. The air smells of fresh bread, sea salt, and the faintest hint of beeswax, a subtle reminder of past absurdities. The festival of the whisker is in full swing, but it's not the wild, unruly celebration of the past rebellion. Instead, it's a gentle, warm-hearted commemoration, people donning fake mustaches, children decorating their faces with charcoal sketches of elaborate whiskers, merchants offering discounts on grooming supplies, and minstrels singing songs both silly and sincere. You wander through the crowds, watching the mingling of old and young, noble and commoner, all united in this peculiar, joyous tradition. Laughter bubbles up like a shared secret, a balm for the years of tension and turmoil. Historians still debate whether such traditions were effective at healing the wounds of conflict or if they merely papered over deeper divisions. But standing here, among the smiling faces, you suspect that sometimes laughter is the best medicine, even for an empire. At the edge of the festival, a storyteller captivates an audience with tales of the Mustache War, exaggerated, embellished, and rich with humor. Children hang on every word as he describes the daring escapades of the bristlers, the foolish decrees of emperors, and the brave, absurd defiance of ordinary people. You smile, thinking of the countless ways history becomes legend, legend becomes myth, and myth becomes the stories we tell to make sense of ourselves. Later, as twilight paints the sky in hues of purple and gold, you find yourself on a quiet rooftop overlooking the city. The domes and minarets silhouette against the fading light, the harbor calm and reflective. You think back over the long, strange journey, from a simple grooming decree to war, rebellion, exile, and finally to this moment of fragile peace. It's hard to believe that so much could turn on a mustache. But then, you remind yourself, history is full of such moments, small, strange, seemingly trivial sparks that ignite great fires. And perhaps that is the true story of Byzantium, not a tale of unbroken power or endless glory, but a story of resilience, absurdity, and the stubborn will to endure. You lean back, the cool breeze brushing your face, and let your eyes close, letting the city's gentle rhythm lull you. Tomorrow will come with its own challenges, its own stories. But tonight, you rest. You drift through the city as night deepens, the lamps casting pools of soft light on worn cobblestones. Constantinople breathes quietly beneath a tapestry of stars, its ancient stones whispering secrets of glory, folly, and resilience. The festival of the whisker winds down. Lanterns bob along the waterways, reflections dancing like fleeting memories. You watch as families gather in courtyards, sharing stories over steaming cups of spiced wine, children tugging at the edges of their parents' cloaks, faces painted with playful mustaches. The city is calm, but beneath the surface, the pulse of history beats steady and strong. You think back over the strange, winding path that brought the empire from the absurdity of a Moustache decree to this moment of quiet peace. Emperors waxed and waned, armies marched and faltered, but the people endured, often laughing, sometimes crying, always moving forward. Historians still argue about the lasting impact of the Moustache Rebellion. Was it a mere footnote, a comic distraction in a grand saga? Or did it mark a subtle shift, a reminder that power is fragile, that symbols can inspire as much as swords, and that even the smallest acts of defiance can echo through time? You lean back, feeling the cool stone beneath you and the vast sky above. The air carries the faint scent of honey and cedar, a reminder of distant gardens and quiet monasteries. In the distance, a lone minstrel strums a lute, singing softly a ballad you recognize, the tale of emperors and mustaches, of folly and survival, of laughter in the face of ruin. Your eyelids grow heavy. The city's heartbeat slows, the world softens. And you know that tomorrow, as always, history will continue to unfold, in all its strange, unpredictable, wonderfully human glory. So you close your eyes, letting the night carry you gently into sleep. Rest well, traveler. The empire waits. Good night. Sweet dreams.